My parents created a point system where we earn our right to stay in the family and my little sister is losing. The social worker's hands trembled as she read the laminated chart hanging on our refrigerator. My sister Lily's name sat at the bottom, her total circled in red marker with the words "Final Warning" written beneath it. She was 8 years old and 3 points away from what my parents called reassignment. I was 16, standing in my own kitchen, explaining to a stranger why my family operated like a corporate performance review. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while my mother sat at the table, calm as ever, explaining that the system was designed to teach accountability. My father nodded along, his leather portfolio open to pages of spreadsheets tracking our every behavior since childhood. The social worker, Diana Okonkwo, had been doing this job for 12 years. She told me later she thought she'd seen everything. She was wrong. None of us were prepared for what the chart actually meant, or what happened to the children who reached zero. I need to tell you how we got here, because without context, you'll think I'm exaggerating. My parents are Dr. William and Dr. Catherine Ashford, both psychology professors at the university. They published papers on behavioral modification and childhood development. They gave TED Talks about raising resilient children. Their book, Structured Love, A Framework for Family Success, sold over 200,000 copies. They were experts, and we were their proof of concept. My older brother Nathan was the first success story, valedictorian, scholarship to Yale, now in medical school. I was the second honor roll, varsity swimmer, already receiving early recruitment letters. We were the children they showed off at conferences, the ones they photographed for magazine profiles. But Lily was different. Lily had been different since the day she was born, and our parents had been trying to fix her ever since. The point system wasn't new. It had governed our household for as long as I could remember. But it wasn't until I found the basement files that I understood what it really was. The system seemed reasonable at first glance, or at least that's what I told myself for 16 years. You earned points for good grades, completed chores, positive behavior, and meeting weekly goals. You lost points for talking back, missing deadlines, emotional outbursts, or what my parents called disruptive self-expression. The points determined everything: allowance, privileges, participation in family activities, even which meals you could eat. High performers got steak dinners and movie nights. Low performers got plain rice and early bedtimes. It was meritocracy, my father said. It was preparing us for the real world, my mother explained. And for Nathan and me, it worked. We learned to perform, to achieve, to suppress anything that might cost us points. We became exactly what they wanted. But Lily couldn't do it. She cried too easily, asked too many questions, wanted hugs when the schedule didn't allow for hugs. She was diagnosed with ADHD at 5, which my parents treated not as a condition requiring accommodation, but as a character flaw requiring correction. Her point total had been declining since kindergarten, and now, at 8, she was running out of time. The morning everything changed started like any other Sunday, with the weekly family meeting. We gathered in the living room at precisely 9 o'clock, because punctuality earned points and lateness cost them. My father projected the spreadsheet onto the wall, showing our running totals for the month. Nathan's score blinked green at the top, 847 points. Mine followed, 792. My mother smiled at both of us, the specific smile she reserved for satisfactory data. Then came Lily's number, 23. The room went silent. 23 points meant she was in the red zone, the territory my parents called intervention threshold. I watched my little sister sit perfectly still on the couch, her hands folded in her lap the way she'd been trained, her eyes fixed on the carpet. She didn't cry anymore during these meetings. She'd learned that crying cost 5 points per incident, and she couldn't afford to lose anymore. My father cleared his throat and began explaining the consequences matrix for children who fell below acceptable performance levels. That's when he said the word reassignment for the first time, and my stomach dropped through the floor. I waited until after dinner to ask my mother what reassignment meant. She was loading the dishwasher in that precise way she had, every plate arranged at the exact same angle. She didn't look at me when she answered. She said that some children weren't suited for high-performance family environments. She said that placement with relatives or alternative guardians was sometimes the kindest option for everyone involved. She said it like she was explaining a business restructuring, like Lily was a department being outsourced rather than her daughter being abandoned. I asked her if she was seriously considering giving away her 8-year-old child. She finally turned to face me, and her expression was the same one she used during lectures: patient, condescending, absolutely certain of her own correctness. She said they weren't giving Lily away. They were optimizing family outcomes. She said Aunt Grace in Oregon had already expressed interest. She said the transition could be completed by the end of the month if Lily's performance didn't improve. I stood in that kitchen and felt something break inside me, some foundational belief about what parents were supposed to be. That night, I started documenting. My phone became my weapon, recording conversations through my bedroom door, photographing the charts and spreadsheets during moments when my parents stepped away. I didn't know exactly what I was gathering evidence for, but instinct told me I would need proof. The first recording captured my father explaining to Lily why her bedtime story privilege had been revoked. She'd scored below target on a spelling test, which cost her 15 points, pushing her below the threshold for optional comfort activities. She asked him, in this tiny voice that still haunts me, if she could earn extra points by doing more chores. He told her the system didn't allow for credit, only for consistent performance. She asked if he still loved her even when her points were low. He paused for so long that I thought the recording had glitched. Then he said that love in this family was demonstrated through achievement, not sentiment. I saved that file 3 different places. I saved every file 3 different places. My hands shook every time I hit record, but I kept doing it anyway. The charts in the basement were worse than anything on the refrigerator. I found them during a Sunday when my parents were at a conference, presenting their research on incentive-based parenting to a room full of other academics who probably thought they were geniuses. The filing cabinet was locked, but my mother kept backup keys taped behind the water heater, a detail I discovered at 12 during a game of hide-and-seek. The folders were organized by child, color-coded and cross-referenced with dates going back to Nathan's infancy. His folder was thin, mostly green check marks and positive annotations. Mine was thicker, documenting a period when I was 9 and struggled with math, complete with graphs showing my recovery trajectory after they implemented enhanced consequences. But Lily's folder was massive. It contained psychological assessments they'd conducted themselves, behavior modification plans with escalating punishments, and correspondence with 3 different alternative placement coordinators dating back 2 years. My parents hadn't just been threatening reassignment. They'd been planning it since Lily was 6, waiting for her point total to justify what they'd already decided to do. The document that made me physically sick was a cost-benefit analysis. My father had created a spreadsheet calculating the resource allocation required to raise Lily to adulthood versus the projected return on investment based on her current performance trajectory. He'd assigned dollar values to everything: tutoring, therapy, time spent on behavior correction, emotional labor from the family unit. The bottom line showed a negative number in red, accompanied by a note suggesting that reallocation of resources to higher-performing family members would optimize collective outcomes. He had reduced his own daughter to a math problem and decided she wasn't worth solving. My mother had signed off on the document with her initials and a comment praising his rigorous methodology. I photographed every page. I photographed the correspondence with the placement coordinators. I photographed the letter they'd already drafted to Aunt Grace, explaining that Lily's behavioral challenges made her unsuitable for their household, but that she might thrive in a less demanding environment. They'd made it sound like they were doing everyone a favor. They'd made abandoning their child sound like good parenting. I told Nathan first, calling him at Yale because I needed someone else in this family to know, someone who might remember what normal was supposed to look like. He listened to me describe the files for about 3 minutes before cutting me off. He said I was being dramatic. He said the system had worked fine for both of us. He said Lily's problems were Lily's problems and that maybe some kids really weren't meant for certain families. When I asked him if he thought our parents would actually go through with it, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said that maybe it would be better for everyone. He said Lily was a constant source of stress and that her presence destabilized the household metrics. He used the word metrics to describe his family. That's when I realized Nathan hadn't survived our childhood. He'd been completely absorbed by it. He was them now, just younger and more articulate. I hung up on him and sat on my bed crying for 20 minutes, which would have cost me 10 points if anyone had seen. Then I called the Child Protective Services hotline and asked to speak with someone about psychological abuse. Diana Okonkwo called me back the next morning. She was careful on the phone, asking clarifying questions, requesting that I describe specific incidents with as much detail as possible. I told her about the point system, the food restrictions, the sleep deprivation used as punishment, the emotional withholding, the plans for reassignment. She asked if I had any documentation. I told her I had hundreds of files. I told her I had recordings. I told her I had a cost-benefit analysis that calculated whether my sister was worth keeping. There was a long pause on the line, and then Diana said she would be at our house the following afternoon for a welfare check. She told me to act normal until then, to not alert my parents, to make sure Lily was safe. That night, I slept in Lily's room for the first time in years, telling my parents I was helping her with a school project. She curled up against me like she used to when she was little, before she learned that physical affection cost points if it wasn't scheduled. She whispered that she was scared. She whispered that she didn't want to go to Oregon. She asked me if I thought she was a bad person because her points were low. I held her so tight my arms ached and promised her I would fix this. I had no idea if I could keep that promise. The welfare check changed everything and nothing. Diana arrived with a colleague, a younger caseworker named James Fitzgerald, who specialized in documenting evidence of psychological abuse. My parents welcomed them with professional courtesy, offering coffee and explaining their research-based parenting methodology, as if they were being interviewed for a magazine rather than investigated for child abuse. They showed the charts willingly, proudly even, explaining the point allocations and the behavioral outcomes. My father quoted statistics from his own published research. My mother discussed the psychological literature supporting incentive structures. They were so confident, so convinced that anyone who understood the science would agree with their approach. Diana asked about the reassignment threshold. My mother explained it calmly, using phrases like alternative family placement and optimizing child environment fit. She made sending Lily away sound like a reasonable educational choice, like choosing a different school district. Diana's face remained neutral, but I watched James's hand tighten around his pen until his knuckles went white. They interviewed Lily separately, in her bedroom with the door closed. I wasn't allowed to be present, but I waited in the hallway, listening to her small voice answering questions I couldn't quite hear. The interview lasted 45 minutes. When Diana emerged, her professional mask had slipped just slightly, a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. She told my parents they would be conducting a formal investigation. She told them that certain aspects of their household management raised concerns that required further evaluation. My father started to argue, citing precedent and research and their credentials as experts in child development. Diana cut him off. She said expertise didn't exempt anyone from child welfare laws. She said a child's psychological safety wasn't negotiable regardless of academic theory. She said they would be contacted within 72 hours regarding next steps. My mother's smile didn't falter, but something flickered behind her eyes. They hadn't expected this. They genuinely believed their system was defensible. They genuinely believed they were good parents. The 3 days between the welfare check and the official investigation were the longest of my life. My parents' behavior shifted in subtle ways that terrified me. They started speaking in lower voices when they thought we couldn't hear. My father spent hours on the phone with a lawyer named Douglas Hartman, a specialist in family law who'd helped other high-profile academic clients navigate CPS scrutiny. They moved the laminated chart from the refrigerator to my father's office, replacing it with a handwritten list of family goals that looked almost normal. They started calling Lily sweetheart instead of her name, a performative warmth that made my skin crawl. But they also increased surveillance on me specifically. My mother started asking questions about my phone usage, my web browsing history, my conversations with friends. She suggested I might be overstressed from academic pressure and could benefit from reduced screen time. I moved all my documentation to an encrypted cloud folder and deleted it from my devices. I was 16 and hiding evidence from my own parents like a spy in a thriller movie. Lily's behavior changed too, but in the opposite direction. She became quieter, smaller, more careful. She stopped asking for things entirely, not even water at meals unless she was directly offered. She started checking the spot where the chart used to hang multiple times a day, confused by its absence but afraid to ask about it. One night I found her making a list of ways she could earn more points, writing in her careful third-grade handwriting all the chores she could do, all the behaviors she could improve, all the ways she could be good enough to stay. The list was 3 pages long. At the bottom she'd written, "I will try harder, I promise. Please don't send me away." I took a photo of that list. I took a photo of everything. I was building a case for my sister's right to exist in her own family, and every piece of evidence felt like a weapon against the people who were supposed to protect us. The dissonance was unbearable. I loved my parents and I was terrified of them, and I was gathering proof that they were monsters. All 3 things were true simultaneously. The investigation formally opened on a Thursday, with official notification arriving via certified mail and hand delivery. My father tried to refuse the documents initially, claiming some kind of academic immunity that didn't exist. Douglas Hartman was present, having apparently moved into our guest room to provide round-the-clock legal strategy. The lead investigator was Dr. Patricia Oyalaran, a forensic psychologist with the state's Child Welfare Division, who specialized in cases involving atypical family structures and alternative discipline methodologies. She arrived with a team of 3, including Diana and James from the initial visit, plus a documentation specialist who photographed every room of our house. They found the files in the basement within the first hour. Dr. Oyalaran spent 4 hours reading through them while my parents sat in the living room with their lawyer, maintaining the posture of concerned professionals being unfairly targeted by an overzealous system. I gave my recorded files to James via a flash drive I'd hidden in my backpack. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped it twice. He looked at me with something like sadness and something like respect, and told me I was doing the right thing. The interviews were conducted separately over 3 days. They spoke to Lily first, in a child-friendly room at the county offices with stuffed animals and crayons and a 2-way mirror. Dr. Oyalaran was gentle with her, asking about her daily routine, her favorite things, what made her happy, what made her scared. Lily answered carefully at first, the way she'd been trained, giving responses that were accurate but emotionally flat. But then Dr. Oyalaran asked her to draw a picture of her family doing something together. Lily drew a chart. She drew stick figures standing next to it, each one with a number above its head. She drew herself at the bottom, with a red circle around her number and the word bad written underneath. She drew a car driving away with a little girl inside it. When Dr. Oyalaran asked what was happening in the picture, Lily said it was, "What happens to children who can't be good enough?" She said it the way other children say, "What happens when the sun goes down?" Or, "What happens when you plant a seed?" It was just a fact of her world, a natural law. Children who couldn't earn enough points got sent away, and she was next. My interview lasted 6 hours. I told them everything, from my earliest memories of the point system to the cost-benefit analysis I'd found in the basement. I played them the recordings, the conversations I'd captured through doors and walls, my father explaining to Lily why love was conditional, my mother discussing reallocation of resources with placement coordinators. I showed them the photographs, the charts spanning back to infancy, the correspondence with Aunt Grace, the legal preparations for transitioning Lily out of the family. James documented everything while Dr. Oyalaran asked follow-up questions, her voice neutral but her eyes increasingly troubled. She asked me how I'd managed to maintain such high performance myself under these conditions. I told her I'd learned early that survival meant compliance, that questioning the system cost points, that the only way to stay safe was to become exactly what they wanted. She asked if I ever felt loved by my parents. I said I felt approved of sometimes. I said I wasn't sure if there was a difference until I started watching how they treated Lily. She wrote something down and didn't show me what it was. My parents' interview was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, but Douglas Hartman spent the morning trying to postpone it. He filed motions claiming procedural violations, citing their professional credentials as evidence that the investigation was targeting accomplished academics based on philosophical disagreements about parenting. The judge denied every motion within hours. Dr. Oyalaran questioned them separately, starting with my mother, who maintained her composed demeanor throughout. I wasn't in the room, but James told me later what happened. My mother defended the point system as an evidence-based framework for childhood development, citing her own research and the success of Nathan and me as proof of its effectiveness. When asked about Lily's declining scores, she explained that not every child is suited for high-performance environments, and that recognizing fit was an act of love rather than rejection. When asked about the cost-benefit analysis, she paused for the first time. Then she said that responsible parenting requires resource allocation decisions, and that they'd explored all options to optimize family outcomes. Dr. Oyalaran asked her directly if she loved Lily. My mother said she valued her and was committed to her development within appropriate constraints. She never said the word love. My father's interview went worse, though not in the way anyone expected. He arrived confident, treating the session like an academic defense rather than a child welfare investigation. He brought printed copies of his published research, PowerPoint slides showing Lily's performance trajectory, and testimonials from colleagues praising his work on behavioral modification. He presented the point system as a gift, a preparation for a world that wouldn't coddle underperformers, a methodology that had produced 2 exceptional children and would have produced a third if certain developmental challenges hadn't interfered. Dr. Oyalaran let him talk for nearly an hour before asking a single question. She asked him to describe a moment when he'd comforted Lily without any reference to points, performance, or behavior. He started to answer 3 times. Each time he caught himself and stopped. Finally, he said he couldn't recall a specific instance because comfort without structure creates dependency. He said it like it was obvious, like any good scientist would understand. Dr. Oyalaran noted that he'd just admitted to never providing his 8-year-old daughter with unconditional emotional support. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, faster than any of us expected. Douglas Hartman scrambled to prepare a defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Oyalaran submitted her evaluation, concluding that Lily was suffering from chronic psychological abuse consistent with conditional attachment and emotional neglect, and that both parents demonstrated fundamentally impaired capacity for unconditional parental bonding. She recommended immediate removal from the home and placement in protective custody, while longer-term solutions were evaluated. The judge, Honorable Margaret Abiola, reviewed the files during a recess that lasted 4 hours. When she returned, her face was set in an expression I'd never seen on a judge before, equal parts anger and sorrow. She granted emergency custody to the state and ordered a full psychological evaluation of both parents. My mother's composure finally cracked. She demanded to know by what authority a court could override scientifically validated parenting practices. Judge Abiola said the authority of any decent person who understood that children weren't performance metrics. She said it quietly, but it carried. The hardest part was explaining to Lily what was happening. Diana and I sat with her in a small office with blue walls and tissue boxes on every surface. I held her hand while Diana explained that she would be staying somewhere else for a while, somewhere safe where nobody measured her points. Lily listened carefully, the way she always did, processing information before responding. Then she asked if she'd done something wrong. She asked if her score had finally reached 0. She asked if this was the reassignment her parents had talked about. I started crying before I could stop myself. I told her no, this was different. This was people who wanted to help her. This was the beginning of something better. She looked at me with those enormous eyes that had seen too much and understood too much and been hurt too much, and she asked a question that destroyed me. She asked if I would still love her even if she never earned enough points. I said yes. I said yes forever. I said points didn't matter. They never should have mattered, and everyone who told her otherwise was wrong. She climbed into my lap and cried for the first time in months, the kind of crying that costs 5 points per incident, and I held her and let her cry as long as she needed. The criminal charges came 3 weeks later, filed by the district attorney's office after reviewing the full investigation file. My parents were charged with child abuse, emotional neglect, and conspiracy to commit abandonment, a rarely used statute that applied when parents made documented plans to relinquish custody as punishment for behavior. The prosecutor, ADA Raymond Nwosu, held a press conference explaining that psychological abuse was no less damaging than physical abuse and that the state would pursue justice for children regardless of their parents' professional credentials. My parents' colleagues started distancing themselves immediately. The university launched an internal investigation into their research methodologies. Their publisher quietly pulled their book from circulation pending review. The TED Talks were removed from the website. The awards they'd won were reconsidered. Everything they'd built on the foundation of their evidence-based parenting began to collapse brick by brick, as the evidence was actually examined by people who cared about children rather than data. The trial lasted 2 weeks and received national media attention. Journalists called it the point system case, and wrote think pieces about the pressure on parents to optimize their children's performance, about the dark side of achievement culture, about what happens when the desire for success overrides the capacity for love. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological damage of conditional attachment, the way children internalize the message that their worth is contingent on performance, the long-term consequences of growing up in environments where affection is earned rather than given. Lily didn't testify, spared by her age and by a judge who understood that making her relive her experiences would cause more harm. But her drawings were entered into evidence, including the one she'd made for Dr. Oyeleran showing herself being driven away. The jury looked at that drawing for a long time. Some of them cried. My parents' lawyer tried to argue that the system was unorthodox but not abusive. The prosecutor showed the cost-benefit analysis. He showed the correspondence with placement coordinators. He showed a spreadsheet calculating whether a child was worth keeping and concluded that she wasn't. I testified for 4 hours on the second day of trial, describing my childhood under cross-examination that tried to paint me as resentful, attention-seeking, or mentally unstable. Douglas Hartman suggested I'd fabricated evidence to punish parents who held me to high standards. He suggested I was jealous of their professional success. He suggested I'd brainwashed Lily into making false claims. Adia Nwosu objected to every implication, and Judge Abiola sustained most of them. But I had to sit there while my parents' lawyer tried to destroy my credibility in front of a crowded courtroom. I kept my voice steady because losing control would prove their point. I answered every question with facts, dates, specific incidents, documentary evidence. I described listening through doors. I described finding the basement files. I described the morning my mother explained reassignment like she was discussing furniture arrangements. By the time I finished, several jurors wouldn't look at my parents. That felt like something. That felt like people finally seeing what I'd seen all along. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon after 8 hours of deliberation. My parents were found guilty on all counts. My mother wept for the first time in my memory, but even her tears seemed calculated, performed for the jury rather than felt. My father sat completely still, his face blank, like he was watching the results of an experiment he hadn't expected to fail. Judge Abiola scheduled sentencing for the following month, noting that the court would consider the full scope of psychological harm when determining appropriate consequences. Outside the courthouse, Ada Nwosu gave a statement about protecting children from all forms of abuse. Diana stood next to me, her hand on my shoulder, while reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. I looked up at the building where justice had just been delivered and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not relief, not triumph. Just an enormous, aching sadness for the family we might have been if my parents had known how to love without conditions. Sentencing was harsh, but not harsh enough, at least by some measures. My mother received 4 years in state prison. My father received 5. The difference attributed to his creation of the cost-benefit analysis that had shocked even seasoned prosecutors. They were both permanently barred from working with children in any capacity. Their professional licenses were revoked. Their research was retracted from every journal that had published it. Their reputation, the thing they'd valued above everything including their own children, was destroyed beyond recovery. Some people thought the sentences should have been longer. Some people thought psychological abuse should carry the same weight as physical abuse. I thought about Lily's list of ways she could earn more points and decided that no sentence could undo what had been done to her. No punishment could give back the childhood she'd lost. Justice was necessary, but insufficient. Recovery would have to come from somewhere else. Lily went to live with our aunt on my mother's side, not Aunt Grace in Oregon, who'd been willing to take a deficient child off my parents' hands, but Aunt Rachel in Vermont, who'd been estranged from the family for years because she'd questioned the point system when Nathan was young. Rachel had been cut off for suggesting that children needed unconditional love more than performance metrics. She'd been labeled too emotional and insufficiently rigorous, and excluded from family gatherings. Now she welcomed Lily into a home with no charts, no spreadsheets, no laminated consequences. She let Lily eat whatever she wanted at meals. She gave hugs without scheduling them. She told Lily she was loved every single day, not because she'd earned it, but because love wasn't something you earned. The first time Lily asked how many points something was worth, Rachel cried. Then she explained that there were no points anymore. There would never be points again. Lily didn't believe her for months. I chose to stay for my final year of high school, living with the family of my friend Morgan, whose parents had offered their spare room the moment the investigation went public. They were confused by my habits at first, by the way I asked permission for everything, by the way I apologized for taking food from the refrigerator, by the way I calculated whether my presence was a net positive or negative for their household. Morgan's mother, Joyce, sat me down after the first week and told me that I didn't need to earn my place. She said I was welcome because I was Morgan's friend, and because I needed somewhere safe, and those were the only reasons required. She said I could take food whenever I was hungry and use hot water without tracking the minutes and cry without anyone deducting anything from anything. I thanked her and went to my room and sat on the bed staring at the wall for an hour because I genuinely didn't know how to exist in a space where my value wasn't constantly being measured. I'm still learning. The aftermath rippled outward in ways I hadn't anticipated. Other families came forward with similar stories: parents who'd implemented point systems based on my parents' book, children who'd grown up believing love was conditional and worth was quantified. A class action lawsuit was filed against the publisher for distributing what plaintiffs called a manual for psychological abuse. Support groups formed online and in person, spaces where survivors of optimized parenting could share experiences and heal together. Researchers began studying the long-term effects of performance-based family structures, documenting elevated rates of anxiety, depression, perfectionism, and attachment disorders. My parents' work, intended to demonstrate their brilliance, instead became a cautionary tale about the difference between managing children and raising them. I'm told it's now used in psychology courses as an example of how expertise can become pathology. Lily is 10 now, living with Aunt Rachel and thriving in ways our parents would never have predicted. She got a C on a math test last month and brought it home expecting consequences. Rachel hung it on the refrigerator anyway and said she was proud of Lily for trying her best. Lily stared at that test for days, waiting for something bad to happen, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When it didn't, when nothing bad happened at all, she finally started to believe that her worth wasn't tied to her performance. She started painting, something our parents had discouraged as non-productive, and turned out to have remarkable talent. She made friends at school, real friends who liked her for who she was rather than what she could achieve. She told Rachel last week that she felt happy, just happy, not happy because she'd earned enough points or met enough targets, but happy for no reason at all. Rachel called me crying, and we cried together, because that simple statement represented more healing than any therapy could provide. I graduated last spring with honors, not because I needed to prove anything anymore, but because learning had become something I genuinely enjoyed once the fear was removed from it. I'm at college now, studying psychology of all things, trying to understand what happened to my family, and how to prevent it from happening to others. My professors know my background and treat it as both a liability and an asset, a source of insight that comes with the risk of over-identification. I'm in therapy myself, working through the ways I learned to suppress my emotions and calculate my worth and perform rather than exist. It's slow work. Some days I still catch myself mentally assigning point values to my actions, tracking whether I've earned enough to deserve good things. The programming runs deep, but I'm learning to override it, one day at a time, one unconditional kindness at a time. Nathan hasn't spoken to me since the trial. He testified for the defense, describing our childhood as structured but loving, and our parents as demanding but fair. He called me a traitor during a break in proceedings, the only time he addressed me directly. I don't hate him for it. He's as much a product of that system as I am, just damaged in different ways. He survived by becoming them, by internalizing their values so completely that he couldn't recognize abuse, even when it was documented in spreadsheets and evaluated by professionals. Maybe someday he'll understand. Maybe someday he'll look at his own children, if he has them, and realize that love isn't supposed to be earned. Maybe he'll spend his whole life believing that performance is the same as worth. I can't save him. I could only save Lily, and barely that. I think about my parents sometimes, serving their sentences in different facilities, their reputations destroyed, their life's work discredited. I don't know if they understand what they did. I don't know if they're capable of understanding. They believed so completely in their system, in the righteousness of conditional love, in the virtue of treating children like investments rather than people. They weren't monsters in the traditional sense. They didn't hit us or starve us or lock us in closets. They just never learned how to love without keeping score, and they built an entire family structure around that inability, and they nearly threw away their youngest child because she couldn't perform according to specifications. Sometimes I think the cruelest abuse is the kind that comes wrapped in good intentions and scientific language. Sometimes I think my parents genuinely believed they were helping us. That makes it worse somehow. That makes it so much worse. If you've made it this far, I want to leave you with something Lily said to me last Christmas, the first holiday we spent together at Aunt Rachel's house. We were sitting by the tree, just the two of us, watching the lights blink on and off. She turned to me and said she was glad our family fell apart. She said she was sorry for what I went through to make it happen, but she was glad the chart was gone and the points were gone and she didn't have to be afraid anymore. She said she used to think there was something wrong with her, something broken that made her unable to earn enough love. Now she knows there was something wrong with them instead. She's 8 years old. She figured out something our parents never could, that love isn't supposed to be earned, it's supposed to be given, freely and completely, without spreadsheets or cost-benefit analyses or laminated charts on the refrigerator. She figured it out at 8. They never figured it out at all. That's the real tragedy of my family. Not that they created a point system, not that they nearly gave away their daughter, but that they had 3 children who needed to be loved, and they never learned how to do it. I still have all the documentation saved on an encrypted drive I keep in a safety deposit box. Sometimes I think about deleting it, letting go of the evidence now that justice has been served. But I keep it as a reminder of what happened and why it mattered. I keep it because someday Lily might want to understand what was done to her and how she escaped. I keep it because some stories need to be preserved, even the painful ones, especially the painful ones. Our family operated on a point system, and my little sister was losing, and I burned it all down to save her. That's not a story with a happy ending, not really. It's a story with a surviving ending. It's a story about learning that love isn't supposed to be conditional, that children aren't investments, that families aren't corporations. It's a story I'll be processing for the rest of my life. But Lily is safe now. Lily is loved now. Lily is enough, just as she is, without earning a single point. And in the end, that's the only metric that matters. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.